The strikes on Iran at the weekend, and then the strikes from Iran to US bases and into Israel, causing havoc when it comes to the flight plans. It's causing havoc when it comes to how our fuel lines will be affected. Already anticipating a spike in the price of petrol here in South Africa, but also major global shipping lines, including MSC. They're suspending transits through the Straits of Hormuz and the Suez Canal with after those US-Israeli strikes on Iran. Now, Iran has threatened to close the Strait of Hormuz, through which roughly 20% of global oil flows. And so that means that several carriers are diverting vessels around the Cape of Good Hope, avoiding the Suez Canal, and really asks the question, does South Africa seek to benefit, or are our logistics already strained? Joining me on the line now is Andrew Pike, Senior Consultant at Bowmans. He's the Head of Ports, Rail and Logistics. Good morning, Andrew. Are we already seeing an uptick in vessels routing around the Cape, or is it maybe a bit too early to tell?
Hi, good morning, Lester, and thank you for having me on your program. So it's a little bit early to tell whether the current crisis is pushing traffic around the Cape, but almost certainly it will. As you'll know, we've had an ongoing issue with the Houthis in the Red Sea zone, and there are two choke points. You mentioned the Straits of Hormuz, and that's largely for the oil exports from Saudi, Kuwait, Bahrain, and those areas. And so that's causing its own issue in terms of oil flows. But in terms of the transit route through the Suez, that's normally through the Red Sea. And the Houthis have, in response to this Iranian crisis, threatened to step up their own activity. So although it had settled a bit from where it was last year, it's now going to ramp up. The biggest issue here is that ships have to carry war risks insurance. In other words, insurance against the risk of war and being hit by a stray missile. And insurers around the world have started cancelling war risks insurance for vessels in that particular zone. And so it forces them to come around the Cape, and in any event, if they insist on transiting through Red Sea and Suez, they will then be self-insuring and they will be imposing their own war risk surcharges. So each container, if it was costing $1,000, will now cost $1,200 or $1,300. So it's quite a significant impact on logistics costs. But what's the choice? You're going to lose your ship if you go that route. So we'll start seeing more of an uptick. The typical additional transit time from that part of the world is somewhere between 10 and 20 days. And the additional costs of transiting around this route are anything from 15 to 30%. Although remember, you're now saving the Suez transit fee, which itself is a lot of money. It's too early to see the traffic coming this way, but as you say, a number of shipping lines have already indicated that they will no longer be sailing in that region. And so you're going to start seeing more MSC ships, more Maersk ships, Hapag-Lloyd, and all the big names that you would expect coming around the Cape.
Now, Andrew, you think, well, a payday, more vessels around the Cape, more vessels in and around the port of Durban, bunkering, repairs, resupply. Is that the reality, or are current systems, logistical, port, rail systems, too constrained to maybe meaningfully capitalize on increased traffic?
Lester, this is exactly the situation that happened when the Houthi crisis reached its peak. And I think we missed the boat, if you'll pardon the pun. You'll know that SARS declared war, in a sort of metaphorical sense, on bunker suppliers in Algoa Bay, and all bunkering opportunities or activities were shut down in Algoa Bay. Those have resumed to an extent. So that will present a good opportunity for ships to refuel, and they will certainly have to. In terms of the ports themselves, Durban, Cape Town, Port Elizabeth, etc., those should see an uptick in activity. But again, the port operations are a bit constrained. They're much better than they were a year ago or 2 years ago. And so there will be opportunities, there will be ships popping in for repairs, there will be some bunkering activities offshore. And so there's no doubt that it will all be some sort of a boost for our economy. But I don't believe that we will be capitalizing to the fullest extent on it.
Andrew, the global economy, it comes by sea, the goods you order online, the vehicles that are imported into this country, the fuel that comes from the Middle East. What would a protracted Middle East conflict mean for a global economy?
So it'll have a fairly significant impact. As you mentioned, coming through the Straits of Hormuz, there's about 20% of the world's oil and LNG supply that comes through there. With self-interest at heart, thankfully, South Africa, most of our oil comes from Nigeria, Angola, Oman, which is on the right side of the Straits of Hormuz. In other words, it's outside the Straits of Hormuz. And then Saudi, which is inside the Straits of Hormuz. So we would have some impact, but not as big as we might fear. But the very fact that there's a 20% impingement on supplies will push up the oil and gas prices worldwide. You've seen it already. Last time this happened, it went to $100 or something. Right now, I think we're well into the 70s. So that will be an impact. The logistics costs will go up significantly in terms of those extra transit times and costs coming around the Cape. And obviously, all of those costs get pushed down ultimately to the consumer. So I think we'll see, if this is protracted, a slowing down in the world's economy and an impact which will last, beyond the duration of the war. We don't know how long it'll last. We're hearing, it was planned for 5 weeks. I think we know by now that war is pretty unpredictable, and you just look at Russia and Ukraine, and what was meant to be a few days has turned into several years. So we have no idea at the moment, but it could be pretty serious in my view.
War is unpredictable, but South Africa sits at this important choke point, and wouldn't be the first time that vessels had to divert around the southern tip of Africa. You think of the Suez Canal blockage, you think of, as you mentioned, the blockade of the Houthis. Why doesn't the South African government and our ports authorities take great opportunity when times of crisis and opportunity like these arise?
Yeah, and part of any sort of risk management matrix is, how do you manage the upside risks, I would call them. And this is an upside risk for South Africa, that you're going to have these choke ups every now and again. As it is strategically, we're so well positioned for the east-west traffic. You should be seeing ships transshipping, for instance. So ships coming from the east, offloading cargoes and putting them onto ships that are westbound, which would, otherwise the ships would have to transit the full or half the globe themselves. And so we are trying to position ourselves as a transshipment hub, much like a place like Singapore, but it just hasn't happened. It's slow moving. I think it is starting to take shape. You're seeing this privatization or part privatization of the Durban container terminal. That should help efficiencies, but it's a very slow process, and I don't think we've capitalized on it as quickly as we should have, or as efficiently as we should have, by knowing what we know about world geopolitics.
Andrew Pike is a senior consultant at Bowmans, head of ports, rail and logistics. Really appreciate your time.